This particular chapter, we keep opening one door after another. And I suppose doors and thresholds remain the dominant theme, although we have gotten into holidays. And from holidays opened yet another door, which is the door to prayer, which swings back and forth for us, sometimes working really well as an intro to holidays, or as I said once before a couple of weeks ago, both the lock and also the opportunity, also the opening. The lock and the key. Prayer is both the lock and the key. Sometimes it seems as though it can bar us because it gets so heavy and it gets so belabored, and all enlisted in the service of the good. Language gets more and more elaborate, and metaphors get more and more elaborate, and therefore they get hidden from plain view more and more. It requires more of the head, really, than of the heart, because we have to pick apart all of these puzzles, unless, of course, we skip the language and go right to the music, which we often do. Isn't that right? I mean, oftentimes it's really the sound, it's really the voice of the music, the cadence, the melody that lifts us, like all tides lift us, especially when we're not in isolation. We'll have to spend a little bit of time with that at some point also. When we are isolated and when we are all each in our own little cells, our own little boxes, it's hard to join the force of one voice to another, to float all the boats on one single tidal wave of melody, because we can really only imagine it. What does it take really to have a congregation, to have a community that lifts itself? How much personal contact does one need to have in order to make that happen? How much are we lacking if we don't have that kind of contact, the kind of contact that COVID and all of its concerns has denied us? Well, it's something that we get to look at out of the corner of the eye today, I think.
All I hear is chewing.
Okay, I'm finished. Sorry for the sound effects. I was just finishing up something that I needed for my throat, but that's done now. So joining our voices is a very difficult thing when we can't hear a voice other than our own. And if we try to, there is a kind of a lag that is disconcerting more than it is helpful. It's an ancient story, really, to try to determine what is it that helps us concoct community. How is it that we stir the pot? What are the recipes for a great community? Amichai asked this question in a very interesting way in a short poem in which he said, when we sing Sim Shalom, how are we supposed to sing Sim Shalom? Are we supposed to sing it in a way that is so nice and peaceful and beautiful? Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha, or however you imagine it. Because he says if we sing it that way, as opposed to saying, give us peace, God's likely to think that we're just having a concert and enjoying the music. How's God supposed to know what our intention is? So we're caught. We don't really know what to do. How do we stir together community? How do we stir it together for the benefit of a community that goes and grows together? Well, I brought for you a text that we have read before, or some of us have read it before. And it probably is a text that requires telling more than it does require reading. So let me tell you the story, because the text is laced with some kinds of background, and I should give it to you. And then you can consider the text, which is in the chat, and then we will consider also a poem by Rivka Miriam. It has to do with this convergence of holidays and building the strength of a holiday through the prayer service, and through the convergence of generations, one in the next, that help to strengthen, to give us the muscle, and in some ways the muscle to hold gently, to hold the prayer text gently, and to hold ourselves gently as well. Well, you might know that Elijah, the prophet, Zachor Latov, of may he always be remembered for good, that Elijah was taken up into heaven in a fiery chariot, according to the tradition of the Book of Kings. And that is how he made his escape. No death, no burial, escaping the gravitational field of the world. And in escaping the gravitational field of the world, he gave the rabbis of the next generations just exactly what they needed. He gave them a slip of rabbinic imagination, a way of saying the best of Elijah, not the bloodiest and most muscular, but the best of Elijah we would love to take for ourselves and keep in our world, so that we can always say, Zachor Latov, may he always be remembered for the good. And so Elijah became the one who would meet you on the road, who would help you out, the one who would guide, the one who would direct, the one who would instruct, the one who would inspire, the one who would teach or point out the way. And sometimes you never even saw him face to face. Sometimes he was the person in front of you who asked the very question that you would like to ask, but were too embarrassed to ask. And now Elijah in front of you has asked the question. And although you've never seen his face, you have gotten some help from someone who was appointed to be there just for you and just then. Because that's part of the imagination, part of the image, a part of the beauty, part of the mystery and majesty of Elijah. That every time you turn around, you can say, Zachor Latov, may he be remembered for the good, because Elijah is essentially all good. Elijah, in an earlier iteration of this study, we learned appears at doorways a lot. And that is where he makes his stand between the past and the future, opening the door from one field to another. And here, no less so, but here, prayer also comes into place. It has been rumored that there have been Elijah sightings in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the great sage who would compile the Mishnah. No one knew for sure, but everyone suspected it. And rumors, after all, are based on, well, some kind of truth, I would say. You know what? We don't really need the text for now. I'd rather see the faces, if that's okay. Great. But let's just say that all rumors have their basis in some slim, or tied to some slim thread of truth. This no less so. Elijah had indeed been coming to the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi for a little bit less than a month. And he loved the give and take with Yehuda Hanassi. And the students in the Beit Midrash loved being raised on the tide of possibility that it was Elijah who was entering now or then to sit with the great sage and to learn for a little while. They could peer into the alcove and see the gesticulations and hear the raising and rising voices, and hear the language that is shared by sages. You say this, but I say that. But what if it's this particular way? I reason to myself that this is the case, but Rabbi Ishmael said that is. And so on and so forth. The tropes and the tones and the inflections of one and the other. And these two loved playing together, and they were a perfect match in a certain way. Elijah, who had now peeked behind the curtain, his life had taken him out of the world and into another world, and he lived now in large measure behind the curtain. But he so loved the curtain on the other side, the curtain that was veiled from the side of the earth, from the side of Yehuda Hanasi. So much compassion and love did he retain for humankind, whose number and whose presence he had left. Well, he was allowed to come and interact with all of the human beings who still were human beings of flesh and blood in the world. But he was denied certain things to say, certain paths to tread. He was, after all, the bearer of a certain kind of insider trading, let's say. He knew stuff that other people ought not know. And sometimes he had to bite his lip in order to restrain himself from revealing something that ought not be revealed in the world. But with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, it was not so difficult. Here was a field of play, a field of endeavor, a field of investigating scripture, of unwinding procedure and law and melody and legend and putting them all together in different kinds of ways, in some ways constructing, building and rebuilding and renewing and reorganizing a world and looking forward so much to its next incarnation, to its next iteration. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, of such profound intellect and such a wandering mind, that he could see so intensely into the present that it allowed him a certain view of the future. And Elijah delighted in that because Elijah had a great view of the future. He just simply couldn't reveal it. And yet he could ask the probing questions. He could tease and prompt and promote Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And so it was that they would argue back and forth and in some ways create worlds, and worlds would converge for them in extraordinary ways, in ways beyond Yehuda Hanasi to ever know, and in ways that delighted Elijah. And again, they would share and fence and spar with the words of the tradition. It seems to me that you might say that so-and-so said that. How do you prove that this is the teaching of Rabbi Yossi as opposed to the teaching of Rabbi Hanina? Well, Rabbi Hanina would say this and Rabbi Yossi would say that. And I reason by myself, or take it upon myself to say this, and let me test this assertion against you. One would say to the next, and the next would say to the first. And so their worlds would converge in beautiful ways. Well, it was now coming upon Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month, which happened to be a Sabbath. It was a very, very beautiful and wonderful time, except for the fact that it hadn't rained in a long time in the land of Israel, and people were starting to get frail as the crops were thin. And their patience was running out, and they'd hoped that their God would not abandon them. Those of the Beit Midrash were quite certain that God had not abandoned them because, after all, at least according to the rumors, Elijah the prophet was coming to visit with them and to study with their master virtually every day. When the Sabbath and the renewal of the moon come together, it is an extraordinary event. It is a holiday, a holy day beyond holy days, because one way of counting time every 7 days comes together with another way of counting time every 29 or 30 days, depending upon the cycle of the moon. And so the great convergence of two somewhat out of order and arrhythmic, you might say, ways of counting time would come together. What a beautiful way of celebrating the world's converging of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and Elijah the prophet. And Yehuda HaNasi, the only one in the room who knew that it was indeed Elijah and not a rumor, who came every single day to study, was as excited as he could possibly be. Rosh Chodesh came, and the melodies were raised. The songs became louder and louder, and more frenetic, and more soulful. And yet Elijah did not come. And Yehuda HaNasi hoped that the great prophet would not miss this extraordinary joining of worlds and ways of counting time and accounting for time. But Elijah didn't come. Finally, the prayer service ended and the Beit Midrash community dissipated, each to his own home. And still Elijah had not come, and Yehuda HaNasi was mournful. Well, Elijah finally did show up, as you might imagine, and Yehuda HaNasi, tight-lipped and knuckles white at his side, trying to show as much deference as he could to the prophet, nevertheless said, "Why didn't the master come?" And Elijah plopped down onto one of the pillows in the Beit Midrash and said, "Well, this is a day when the whole world opens up, and I had my tasks. And the first thing I had to do today was to wake up Abraham, Avram Avinu. I had to wake him up, and I had to help him wash his hands, and I had to help him get up and say his prayers and wait for him to finish Nebuch, and then I had to lay him back down again. And then I did the same thing with Isaac, and I got him up and I helped him to wash his hands, and I stood with him while he prayed, and then I had to put him back down again. And Isaac suffers with Parkinson's, and it's difficult to raise and lower Isaac because his body doesn't move like the regular body of an old dead patriarch. So I had to lift up Isaac and put him back down again. And then came Jacob, and exactly the same thing with Jacob. And by the time I'd helped him up and washed his hands and helped him to pray and then put him back down again, I had, alas, run out of time. There was no more time to make it to the Beit Midrash. Yehuda HaNasi understood, but was still annoyed. And he said, "Why didn't you wake them all up at the same time? If you'd awakened them at the same time, there would have been time for you to get to the celebration." And Elijah the prophet looked at his chavruta across the room and said to him, "I reasoned to myself that if I woke up Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all at the same time, then their voice might be so powerful that it would bring the Messiah before his time." Now, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi heard exactly what Elijah had said and what Elijah had meant to say. "I reasoned for myself" is exactly the part of the language that they shared in their discourse across the room in the Beit Midrash. This was a way for Elijah to telegraph ahead that there was something special and deep in the message that he was sending to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The rabbi understood that Elijah was one who could reach only so far across the curtain, past the veil, and had only a certain number of things that he could say. And then that was all. But he could elicit, he could prompt, he could promote, he could in some ways stir Yehuda Hanasi to ask the next question. And the next question is a question to which he might be able to respond with delight. So, Yehuda Hanasi, recognizing the offer that was being made, said to Elijah, well, tell me, are there 3 people alive today on this side of the curtain whose voices would be able to bring the Messiah before his time? And Elijah smiled and nodded and said, yes, there are. There is Rabbi Hanina and his 2 sons. Their voices are so powerful if joined together that they would be able to bring the Messiah before his time. Well, as I said, Sabbath and Rosh Chodesh notwithstanding, and all of the juiciness and wonderfulness of those holidays combining, had not brought the rain. And everything was as pale and as dry as you can imagine. And there was a threat across the land, a shadow across the land, that maybe it would not rain in time for the rainy season to do its work for the land of Israel. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi declared a fast. And he summoned Rabbi Hanina and his 2 sons to come and to pray as the liturgy of the fast unfolded. And people gathered in the Beit Midrash, and the 3 great sages stood in front of the community. And Rabbi Hanina said, Mashiv Haruach, who causes the winds to blow. And the winds started to blow like they had never blown before in the history of the Beit Midrash. Everyone there who had been there in the Beit Midrash since being a little child agreed that never had the clapboard roof chattered like it did. Never had the doors whistled as they did that day. Mashiv Haruach, who causes the winds to blow. And his sons responded by saying, Umorid Hageshem, and let the rains fall. And the rains fell. And some say that every drop of rain was as big as the opening of a rain barrel. And the rains just poured and poured and poured. And now a tremble went through the heavens, as the heavens anticipated the next phrase, which would be, Mechaye Hametim, who raises the dead. Well, who revealed our secrets to the world? Some of the angels said, the secret of what would bring the Messiah before his time. Who revealed the secret? Who threatens to raise the dead right now? All agreed that it had to be Elijah, who always had humankind in his heart and in his mind. And they quickly summoned Elijah to the courtroom of the heavens above. And there they questioned him and condemned him. They found him guilty, and they whipped him with 60 lashes, 60 pulses of electrical current, 60 pulses of light. And he began to scream with anguish and defeat. And his hair stood on end. And all of the hairs of his characteristic animal skin garment stood on end, until he looked like and sounded like a great golden bear. And he ran into the prayer group that was assembled, waiting for the next phrase. all of this accomplished in just a brief eyelash of time. And Elijah ran into the group and broke up the prayer group and scattered everyone. And the prayer was never finished. And the Messiah did not come. Well, that's probably better than reading the story. But the story's there before you if you'd like to read it in its shorter Talmudic form. But I wonder what moves you, what grabs you, what gets you, what propels you from this story. Told or read, however you did it. What do you think? Yeah, David.
Well, I just wonder if the many encounters with Elijah and the rabbis, or maybe us, if since the prophet Malachi says God will send Elijah to us, just before Mashiach comes, maybe every time we encounter Elijah, the door is opened a crack for the advent of Mashiach, if we just know how to open it a little more and welcome him. And something this story seems to add is, just as the Messianic age is like a return to Eden, just before the Messianic age, we'll have like a rerun of the patriarchs. Here it's Rabbi Kanina and his two sons. There's a nice symmetry, that you can find, I think, in that. But if we don't get the door open enough, then it doesn't go well for Elijah or for us. It's kind of another missed opportunity. But I coinciding with the opening the door, I think the encounters with Elijah, throughout the Talmud Midrash, they do provide a glimpse of the possibility of Mashiach. But so what are we supposed to do? How do we bring Mashiach when that door is open a crack? And it with the angel, it just didn't work out in this case. But I tend to think there is a way if we can just figure it out.
Well, I'll tell you another case in which it didn't work out. This was in the late 90s, and it was Tisha B'Av, and I was in Jerusalem on the Kotel Plaza, in the back of the Kotel Plaza, and the place was just a riot of colors and smells and dress and all kinds of melodies from all over the Jewish world. The keening of kinot, the chanting of dirges, and so on, and the great intensity, everything rising and falling according to a particular kind of oceanic cue, as though in some ways, while everybody was different, everybody was the same. And the police presence was built up in the back of the Kotel Plaza so that people could sense that somehow they were protected from anybody who might want to do them harm, and also protected from themselves if they had imagined doing something that was harmful to others. And way in the very back of the Kotel Plaza, some people had set up a little table that said, Baruch haba Melech HaMashiach, welcome to the King Messiah, on a crayon sign taped to the front of the table like a lemonade stand. And on the table there was a glass, a bottle of vodka, and a challah. On Tisha B'Av, if you can imagine it. And people were enraged that on this great fast day that there would be a challah and a bottle of vodka and a glass, and all in the name of the Mashiach. And the people who set it up were accosted, really, verbally accosted, but they defended themselves, saying, it is a matter of faith. You have to believe that the Mashiach is going to come on Tisha B'Av, which is his birthday. And if you don't believe it, if you don't have faith, it'll never happen. and the police were brought into it, and the television cameras were there, and all of the political and social pressures that you can imagine were brought to bear. And finally, the police were persuaded that they had to take down the table and put away the bottle of vodka and the challah and the glass. And so they did. And you know what? The Mashiach didn't come that night either. So, yeah, do we keep missing opportunities somehow?
Yeah, what always struck me is almost paradoxically throughout this story, the idea of the Mashiach coming before his time, that in this instance, the coming of the Mashiach was stopped because the world was apparently deemed not ready for the Mashiach. That, I mean, the idea that there might be a bad time for the Mashiach to come.
Yeah, but we have to live with the possibility that these three, the three who live on this side of the fence, this side of the curtain, could have done it. What do you think about the power of prayer as it's explained in this particular, or as it's presented in this story? How vital is it? It almost worked. It could have worked. Mashiv haruach, who causes the winds to blow, umorid hageshem, and causes the rain to fall. The rain that fructifies, the rain that raises the seeds from their disassembled state, the rain that raises the dead, the rain that brings the Messiah, as it were, if that's coordinate somehow with the raising of the dead from their graves. It could have worked, except that after causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall, the heavens trembled. Wait a minute, who's doing that? This can't happen. It can't happen yet, but it could have happened. It almost happened. If it hadn't been for the vigilant minions above, if it hadn't been for the angels, as it were, according to the fantasy of the story. So what are we learning there about the power of prayer unchecked? It might have worked. And at the end of the story, how is it that the power of prayer is checked once again? It's not that there's a decree from the heavens that says the Mashiach will not come. No, the only way to stop this juggernaut is to stop the prayer. And so the prayer is stopped. Yeah. Hunter, is that a hand?
That's a hand. It just, all of this seems to me to point to the power of words. I just feel like, words have power and we don't always recognize their power.
Thank you. Words have power. Melodies have power. The people who employ them have power. Do words have independent power? Do the words of this prayer have independent power? Does it depend upon who is stirring the pot? Does it depend upon how many people are in shul that day?
It might.
It might.
It might.
Yeah, Sadina.
It seems like prayer, I'm trying to figure out if we pray for the Mashiach to come, but it's not the right time, then is it really our prayer? Is our prayer really doing anything? Is our prayer just going out into space somewhere? Because it doesn't sound like we can really control it, even if we pray desperately. Mashiach is going to come in Mashiach's time. And that seems to be all there is to it. So I understand that they were scared and that they didn't want to bring such power to the earth by having him come before his time. But on the other hand, we're constantly praying for Mashiach to come, or those of us who read that part of the Amidah.
Yeah, the words kind of double back upon themselves. In some ways, they create their own joke. They create their own misperception of themselves. What does it mean for the Messiah to come before the Messiah's time? If people's prayer is of such intensity as Rabbi Hanina and his two sons could have been, as the story suggests, then it would not have been before his time. Or does heaven have a different idea of what it is that is the Messiah's time? And does that even matter? Can human beings make it happen before even the heavens think that it should happen?
And why those particular three? I mean, that's what, I forget who, it was Elijah that identified those three, right?
Right.
And maybe there are three others, maybe there's five others, maybe there's one other. And we're sort of playing with fire here, literally, because that's, the whole world might have burnt up, because it just wasn't ready for Mashiach. So I don't know. It just makes me wonder about those kinds of prayers.
Yeah.
Yes,
Marty?
I had just to spin off that from Sabina. I was enthralled by the story. Thank you. But I guess I'm just thinking this is a glass half empty kind of thought. Sorry, that the futility of human sort of endeavors, like no matter what we do, what do we think we can actually gain? And even the great Hanasi, he was he was irritated that Eliyahu was late or something. Like, oh man, get a grip, and then, it just seemed like, all of our futile, human, trivial attempts to try to influence really what's going to happen. It just seems like it's not going to play out. And when are we going to get tired of trying to sort of influence what we don't have any control over or something? I don't know. It's just the sad little ants we are scurrying around here. But Rabbi, can I ask you, what was the thing about the electric shock? Was that just your little editorial about what it looked like? Like, how would we get any electricity back? They didn't have electricity. Well, they had static electricity. Maybe his hair stood on end because he was so angry or something.
Yeah,
Artie, did you think that he exaggerated that wasn't the exact story word for word?
Well, I don't know. I don't believe that. I'm sure it was verbatim.
that is
the way
my
it was told to me.
That is my movie version of the story. Pulse de nura, pulses of light, is how the punishment is described, which seems to me to be translated to me as static electricity.
But and can you just show my ignorance just among friends for what is really one of my favorite lines of the Amidah? So I thought it was Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed. Isn't that the part about awakening the dead? Or that's the part about he gives life to the living or something? Chayim.
Yeah, sustains the life of the living.
So it's the second phrase that's about awakening the dead.
Yeah, that whole paragraph requires some investigation, I think, on our part. It is an extraordinary paragraph, and so thick and soaked with the metaphors that are both the meta and the for us regarding what it means for the dead to be awakened. All of this points in some ways to questions about how powerful is our prayer, and can we make things happen, or are we just rehearsing? Are we singing things that are really nice and pretty and indulging ourselves in melodies and in hand clapping and all of these things because they are society building? or because we really think that they reach to worlds beyond and within? Is there such a thing as the Messiah before the Messiah's time? Or is messianic time, as it were, whenever we make it happen? And see messianic time as being something that is precipitated by a single person or by a social wave, by a cultural shift, by some group and its adherents and its philosophy influencing and touching another group and another group and another group? Does it happen in the nanosecond that becomes the nanosecond of the story? Or is it something that happens over a very long period of time, as would seem to be the case if we allow this to play itself out over history? But what about the power of prayer, and how shall we approach it? Shall we go to the synagogue thinking we're going to make something happen today? And where is it going to happen? Is it enough if it happens inside of me? Should it be happening amongst and between other people, and then maybe beyond other people? And how is it bound up with the statutory prayer, which is to say, the things that we say because we're taught to say them? Mashiv haruach morid hageshem mechaye hametim, who causes the winds to blow and the rains to fall, and who revives the dead. We say them over and over and over again. They are a catechism, as it were. They are the answers to whatever the questions might be about how it is that we live our lives. And how much more so when Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh come together, and there is when the Sabbath and the new moon come together, and there is so much hope, let's say, as these ways of measuring time and counting time converge one with the next. Maybe we should keep on saying them and saying them and saying them. And it is that to which Rivka Miriam points in the poem that accompanies this. She's interested in another part of the same section. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora, God great and mighty, which comes before Mashiv Haruach and before Morid Hageshem and before who raises the dead. God who is great and mighty and awesome. And so she says the following: great, mighty, and awesome, I said. I said again, great, mighty, and awesome. I had in mind what had occurred in the past, also what had not yet happened, and my ancestors, living and dead. Also my children who have been born, but not yet every one. With my speaking voice, I give voice to the unborn. I don't know if the words in my mouth are complaint or question, begging or plea, whether it is song of praise and thanks bursts from me, or the cry of a lament. I don't know whether the feathery flutter on my shoulder is an affectionate embrace or a scratch, a painful burn hinting at a stump of wing, at the disappearance of the divine presence. Yet I would always return and say again and again and again, great, mighty, and awesome. I would go back and say it, go back and repeat it. Always, 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 despite your orientation, despite your inclination, despite your frame of mind, despite whether you're thinking about the future or the past, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor, that same section of the Amidah, right at the very beginning where we are introducing ourselves. Great, mighty, awesome. Keep going back and back and back and saying it again and again and again and repeating it more and more. But somehow it's from the repetition that the power builds. I had in mind what had occurred in the past, also what had not yet happened, and my ancestors living and dead, also my children who have been born, but not yet everyone. With my speaking voice, I give voice to the unborn. With my speaking voice, I give voice to the unborn. What do you think? There's a certain power regarding prayer implicit there, isn't there? Yeah, David.
Well, is the poet making the prayer into a statement of faith more than fact? We repeat this affirmation, even if maybe God's presence isn't so apparent in the world, but we need to keep saying it. And maybe the words take on a reality of their own that's separate from the facts of reality. It's a different reality, I guess I'm suggesting. I mean, it sounds in that sense like a loser's lament, frankly. In other words, we may not see God's presence in the world, but we want to keep saying it. Maybe it will bring God, maybe it won't, but we have to keep saying the words in the prayers. So at least we have faith, if not the facts.
Yes, but she's also expressing a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if the words are complaint or question, begging or plea, whether it's praise or it's like a scratch or a burn.
Yeah, but she needs to keep on saying them. I don't know what they are. And they might be one and they might be the next. It might depend upon the day. Don't you think? For people who are prayers amongst us, or even occasional prayers, there's different affect, different ways of trying to bring that home, of trying to make sense of it. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorah. What, are you kidding me? Great, mighty, awesome. That's ridiculous. We could read a piece of Talmud next time in which Daniel and Jeremiah stand up and say, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to say that because in my own personal experience, that doesn't happen. You might not think that that would find its way into rabbinic literature, but it does. That's ridiculous. Can't say that. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't comport with my sense of reality. How am I supposed to do that? And then along come some others, the members of the Great Assembly, who are the shepherds of this prayer project. And they say, yeah, but even so, you have to do it. You can try to get behind it in a different way so that the words mean something a little bit different, but or that you see them as being different, but you really have to do it. This is another manifestation of faith, not faith in the sense of belief, but faith in the sense of faithfulness. That, yeah, I'm going to do this because I am a person of that kind of faithfulness, fidelity to the project. I just have, yeah.
Sarah had her hand up.
Yeah, Sarah, sorry.
That's all right. So, I mean, for me, I think of prayer as being I pray for, the prayers are for me. They're for my benefit. They're not for God. It's a way of speaking my relationship into being, and for even to realize at any given moment what my relationship to God is. Some tours through the prayer book, there will be some prayers that I will deeply connect to, and other times they will leave me cold. And that experience tells me something about what my relationship is to God at that time. So I feel like it's for me and for the community to participate, in the community.
Yeah, good addition. It's for me. It's for my faith. It's for my relationship with a God or power beyond me that is to which I relate. But it's also for the community, because the community needs for us to sing these things, to say these things. And when we do, somehow, there's a little resonance of what I feel like is being said here regarding Rabbi Hanina and his children, that the sum is edging towards being more than equal to the total of its parts. It's edging towards that. It's possible that it could be that.
Wait, I don't agree that as the community needs me to participate. I think that I need to participate. The community doesn't necessarily need me to contribute that.
Huh. Well, you might be underplaying your own role there.
It depends if I sing on key or not.
Well, what do you think? Does the community depend upon you to do it?
Well, I was thinking in terms of being part of the 10 that makes a minyan.
And
Okay,
Lori,
yes. I'm sorry, so you need the 10, but after the 10, the 11th and 12th and 13th, the community doesn't really need me.
Well, but I'm thinking about Pirkei Avot, which says, do not separate yourself from the community. And why, why does Hillel say that? What is the community? Is it all Jews, a subset of Jews, all of the people? And and what constitutes being separate versus being joined? So the passage is really more questions than answers until you get a little farther into things. And Hillel says, don't separate yourself from the community, because the community is a society. It's a total, they endure. And was explained that the community has more existence, and therefore the one who separates from the community separates from something that has the most existence. Society is everything. They have the power of everything, and therefore one who separates from the community separates themselves from everything, and they are outside.
So in that case, yeah, go ahead.
The society is the main thing and not the private individual, for the individual is dynamic and changing, and the society endures.
So in my healing community, we draw on a Kabbalistic phrase called running and returning. And we apply it in a particular way, which means that there are times when some of us are really on, and we can pray or we can be in practice with all of our best selves, all of everything that we've got. And other people are just exhausted and they've got to step back. And we take turns at this. Mm-hmm. And I know that when I'm too tired, somebody else steps forward. And there are other times when I step forward and I can pray or practice with all of my everything, while other people take a break. And so there's also that movement in community.
So I think about community at the end of Yom Kippur or the Rosh Hashanah service when we sing Avinu Malkeinu. And we get to a point where if we have, a huge group, and in the old days when we all gathered at the synagogue for Yom Kippur, and it was really powerful. It was like, I don't know about 100% of the voices, but most voices are there and really feeling something, really feeling that crescendo of the service. And I think about that, with what we were just talking about before with prayer, is that getting to the heavens? Is that your sim shalom in a, Avinu Malkeinu, God, you're there. Help us repent, help forgive us, help us get into the book of life. And it's powerful. It's really, but I feel like it takes that community. Much harder when you're home on Zoom doing it by yourself. So it takes that community to really pull us along.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie, that was because of the cloves in your lemon.
Thank you. That helps. But in answer to the question about, does it really take all of us? It takes a village. That idea that this one's doing this, and this one's caring for the children, and this one is making the coffee for the breakfast, and this one is, the shaliach tzibur who is just belting it out. And it takes all of those voices and all those people together in that community.
Yes. And people repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating
Mm-hmm.
it faithfully. That's the stuff of the poem. And the first part of the Amidah, the prologue, the next part, which gets into the specifics that the Talmud story gets into, says to us, yes, but even so, for the practiced community, there are three people. There are people whose voices can stir us. This perhaps for another time, but it's a question that has perplexed and mystified sages for millennia. Why are some people simply better at it than others? What is there about a particular voice or a particular presence? What is it about the way in which someone gets down to a place that makes all of the strings resonate? The strings of everybody present there resonate in a way that makes for a sum that's more than equal to the total of the parts. Why does that happen? How does that happen? Rabbi Hanina and his children? Well, so says Elijah. Maybe there are others, as Sabina suggests. Maybe there are others. That's a search for us, I think. And it's probably a search for every committee that tries to identify people to lead their Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbat, or Rosh Chodesh prayer services all the time, to try to find just exactly the right people. But what this hour does is leave us in some ways with the mystery of prayer, and knowing that, as the Talmud story says it, there is a power that is independent of the heavens. Human beings can do this. Human beings can do this. Rivka Miriam says, no, we have to just keep on practicing, and we don't think about whether or not there is an end game, but we always have to practice it and go back and say it again. And Yehuda Amichai, with whom we began, says, this is the conundrum. Shall we try to convince God that this is a concert and it's beautiful? And does that mean somehow that we are more calm of heart and peaceful of mind than would be necessary? Or should we really be rattling the gates and saying, Sim Shalom, give us peace? We're not going to leave you alone until you give us peace. Maybe that's the better way to go. We don't know. But we do know that the hour has come to an end. So we'll pick some of this up yet another time.